This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, college graduates are hitting the streets looking for work in a grim economy that has older 20 and 30-somethings under economic pressure, too. Author Tamara Draut reflects on the debt-for-diploma system of higher education and calls for more government support. Now that Mitt Romney has clinched the Republican presidential nomination, the race for 270 electoral votes is on. Political analyst John Halpin outlines the path to the winning margin. And Bill Press talks with correspondent John Nichols of The Nation, reporting from the Wisconsin gubernatorial recall campaign. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. The quality of jobs for non-college graduates is as low as ever, but young people feel they must go to college just to stay even. Then they pile up debt for a diploma that guarantees them little in the search for that first job. Author Tamara Draut examines the economics of being a 20 or 30-something in 2012. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Joining us now, Tamara Draut is Vice President of Policy and Programs for the progressive advocacy organization Demos. She's the author of a book called Strapped: Why America's 20 and 30-somethings Can't Get Ahead. And her focus is on the growing economic insecurity, rising indebtedness, and declining opportunity that now characterize American society. Tamara, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Very happy to be with you.
So, what is the answer to the question of why America's 20 and 30-somethings can't get ahead?
Well, there's many answers, and I think the easiest way to think about it is what has changed in our economy and in public policy over the last generation. So if you look at what has happened to job quality, for example, we know that we lost, even before the recession, a lot of good-paying manufacturing jobs. And what those jobs were replaced with were lower-wage service sector jobs. Then the recession hit, and we lost even more of those sort of middle-skill, middle-level jobs. And again, the job growth is at the lowest levels. So the big thing happening for people just entering the labor market over the last 5 to 7 years, even before the recession, is that earnings are down. So what that means is that today, with one exception, and that is women with college degrees, women with at least a bachelor's degree or higher, are the only ones whose median earnings are greater than their mothers were a generation ago. Men have lost a lot of ground. Men with college degrees have basically treaded water for the last generation. Everybody else has lost significant ground in terms of how much they can earn in this labor market.
What do you point to? I mean, is this partly a result of, can you look at high birth rate 2 and 3 decades ago, a problem of older workers, not being able to retire? So in other words, there are fewer jobs available as well? Do you add all of that into this equation?
Well, there weren't fewer jobs available until we had the Great Recession. And one of the things that did happen is young people entered the Great Recession in a little bit more vulnerable place than other age groups because they had never fully recovered from the recession of 2001. A lot of the jobs that young people lost in 2001 had not come back by the time this recession hit. So they were a little more vulnerable in terms of unemployment already. That being said, the baby boom generation and the millennial generation are about the same size. So this should, in terms of enough jobs to go around in a decent economy, that shouldn't really be the problem. The problem is that we've seen great declines in the quality of the jobs that our economy is creating.
Mm-hmm. And so many are going overseas. That's
Absolutely.
part of it too, right? Yeah.
That is part of it. And, what we used to have was good paying union jobs here for people that didn't have college degrees. Mm-hmm. And now we have a growing low-wage service sector that is almost entirely unorganized and ununionized. So that's one of the big reasons why we see the decline in earnings among young men, particularly young non-college educated men. So all of this, the pressures of a labor market that no longer delivers sort of middle-class jobs for people without college degrees, has sent swarms of young people into higher education because they've rightly recognized that getting a college degree is now absolutely essential to getting ahead in this economy.
Does the decline in opportunity for college graduates affect men more than women?
You know, that's a good question. I think right now the unemployment rate for college-educated women is slightly lower than men, but it's been going back and forth in this recession. When the recession first hit, it was men that primarily lost their jobs, particularly younger men. As we sort of climbed out and the labor market started picking up jobs again, what we saw was women's employment dropped, and that particularly happened as we saw states in public sector employees, particularly at the state level, and that's when a lot of women lost their jobs when states started cutting back. So it's kind of toggled back and forth. I think it's about even right now between young men and women. Okay.
We're speaking with Tamara Draut, who's Vice President of Policy and Programs for the progressive advocacy organization Demos, also the author of the book called Strapped, Why America's 20 and 30-somethings Can't Get Ahead, and that is the focus of our conversation today. Are there specific policies, Tamara, that you have in mind that would perhaps increase employment and economic opportunity for millennials?
Absolutely. I think we have to both think of sort of short and long-term policies here. In the short term, if you look at the unemployment rate, particularly for young people without college degrees and young people of color, you know, they are still in the double digits. We need a serious plan, you know, sort of a New Deal type public jobs program that can get young people good job experience and get them working soon and quickly. In the longer term, we need to really take back the idea that government doesn't serve any productive role in our economy and realize that if we look at other advanced nations like Germany, for example, government has a very strong and productive role to play in helping to plan our economy, and that means investing in things like research and development, investing in our infrastructure so that we have again, the world's best infrastructure, which is essential to having a thriving economy. So there are key investments we need to make to lay a foundation for future economic growth and job growth.
Now, what do we need to do about the rising cost of a college education and the crushing student loan debt incurred by so many people just starting out in life? Because, you know, as you say, you've got to have an education. I mean, you got people with MBAs sitting on the sidelines right now. So if you don't at least have that 4-year degree, you're really starting off way behind. However, now you've got a whole nother issue with it, and that is the rise of college education, or the debt that is associated with the college education nowadays.
That's exactly right. And I think it's important to figure out how we solve this problem by really understanding why we have this debt for diploma system. And the fundamental shift that has happened is that over the last 2 to 3 decades, who pays for higher education has shifted from it being a public responsibility to being a private responsibility. We have essentially slowly, over the course of 2 to 3 decades, basically privatized the cost of our public higher education system. So students now, 2 out of 3 borrow to go to school. They leave with $25,000 in debt on average. And the main reason why is because state funding for higher education on a per-pupil basis has declined over time. And that leads to rising tuition prices. So today, our public universities are getting less money from the state and more money from tuition dollars, which a lot of students, most students, pay for by taking on too much debt.
Mm-hmm. Is there something that can be done from a policy standpoint to redirect it back to where it was?
Well, you know, so many of these problems, whether it's the really inequitable labor market we have or the higher education system that leaves so many people with debt and locks out a lot of young people from ever getting the degree they want in the first place, is about the priorities. and the sort of rise of this you're on your own free market ideology that basically has retrenched the role of government in providing that level playing field that, Americans, we have consensus around, but it has slowly been eroded with a deliberate attack. So it's about getting back to some fundamental basics that, have defined America for generations, and that is that we believe in equal opportunity and that we agree that the government plays a really strong role in supporting institutions that help further equal opportunity. And higher education and education in general is a really big one.
I can think of a few guys that are out on the campaign trail right now that would probably strongly disagree with that assessment with the role of government. I mean, it seems to be this constant fight from the right about the government's role in anything, and so this is an uphill battle that just seems almost impossible to win.
Well, I think it is the battle of this election in many ways. I think the stalemate that has happened in Congress is happening over some really fundamental differences in how we view the role of government in our society. And it has been we are certainly progressives who believe that government has a role to play are the underdogs right now in this debate because it's been a 3 decades long assault on the role of government. But I think we have a serious overreach here, and I think that most Americans realize that the course we've been on of deregulate, privatize, cut taxes is not leading to the kind of broadly based prosperity and the kind of middle-class nation we were all very proud of in this country.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for. One of the popular elements of President Obama's health care reform is allowing children up to age 26 to remain on their parents' insurance plans. But is that really a significant part of young people's economic problems? I mean, after all, they're generally in good health.
It's surprising. We have this perception that young people, yes, they're in good health and they don't need insurance. But, Demos has actually done some studies where we look at credit card debt among low and middle income people. And even among young people, a lot of their credit card debt is due to out-of-pocket medical expenses. And they are certainly not immune from going into medical debt and credit card debt due to a lack of insurance, either being uninsured or having pretty flimsy coverage. So it actually is a real issue. And the other reason it's important is there's lots of important, preventive health needs, particularly for young women, that are really hard to get access to without insurance. So it's an important step, but it is certainly not, going to turn the tide that is against young people right now starting out in this economy.
Tamara Draut is Vice President of Policy and Programs for the progressive advocacy organization Demos, also the author of the book called Strapped, Why America's 20 and 30-somethings Can't Get Ahead. Tamara, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to speaking to you again soon right here on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks so much.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, political expert John Halpin's state-by-state analysis shows that President Obama can win re-election, but as of now, it could be by as little as 5 electoral votes. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Unless you hang out in posh watering holes with America's far-right billionaires, chances are that you don't know Diane Hendricks. But Scott Walker, Wisconsin's anti-middle-class, union-whacking governor, knows her and loves her a lot. In fact, Scott loves Diane at least $500,000 worth. That's how much the heiress to ABC Supply, the nation's largest roofing and siding wholesaler, has put down so far on Walker's desperate effort to avoid being only the 3rd governor in U.S. history to lose a recall election. His day of reckoning is tomorrow, And his last bastion of support is a phalanx of union-hating out-of-state billionaires like Hendricks and the infamous Koch brothers, who've erected a multi-million-dollar wall of money around him. We've spent a lot of money in Wisconsin, deadpan David Koch of New York City. We've gotten pretty good at this over the years, he boasted of his extremist political attack machine, adding that we're going to spend more. As of last week, Scott had amassed $30 million from friends like David, a sum comparable to what Mitt Romney's campaign raised to win the GOP presidential nomination. Such Koch cronies as the DeVos family, founders of the Amway marketing empire, chipped in $250,000 for the right-wing's nationwide Save Scott campaign. And Foster Freeze, the evangelical billionaire who dumped a ton of cash on Rick Santorum's theocratic run for the presidency this year, is in for $100,000. This is Jim Hightower saying there's an old rule in business. If you don't have any sense behind you, pour in dollars. From the Edsel to New Coke, and now to Scott Walker, the strategy has been to overcome all product defaults with PR cash. Tomorrow, we'll see what Coke Cash can buy. And if it buys the governorship of Wisconsin, look out where you live.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. John Halpin, a political analyst with the Center for American Progress, reports that the 2012 presidential election will come down to 12 states or fewer, and that President Obama can win the race, even if by only a narrow margin. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. John Halpin is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, co-director and creator of its Progressive Studies program, also co-author of a paper that came out last fall called The Path to 270, Demographics versus Economics in the 2012 presidential election. It is an analysis of how President Obama can win re-election. John, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's always nice to talk to you. Now, if you take the states that are certain to go Republican and those that are certain to go Democratic, what is the electoral vote as of today?
Well, people have different estimations of this. Our estimation in the paper is that there's probably 14 states that are certain to go to Obama plus D.C. for a total of about 186 electoral votes, meaning the president would need 84 from a combination of states to actually win the presidency. On the Republican side, based on past patterns, there are likely 22 states plus most of Nebraska, and they'll probably certainly pick up Indiana. So we're estimating about 191 electoral votes that are in the bag for the most part for the GOP, meaning they need about 79 additional votes. And we've been focusing on about 12 battleground states to try and figure out where the various strategies will play out in terms of finding those extra votes.
What are the swing states or regions that will decide the election, you think?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. The map has changed pretty substantially over the past 2 decades, and there are 3 primary areas: the traditional focus of sort of the upper Midwest, the Rust Belt states, and the ones we're most focused on in the paper are Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. We have the emerging West and Southwest, looking primarily at New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada. And then the South, and this is primarily Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. And these are all states, these 12 states that Obama won in 2008 that are in our mind, the essential battleground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a matter of fact, in Virginia's got a big Senate fight on their hand, too.
Yeah, and there are other, there'll be other state and local issues that will pop up. You're going to have some of the collective bargaining fights in other states and other things that will certainly arise. But at the national level, those seem to be, in our mind, the most important states to focus on.
Okay. Can Republicans take voter disenchantment on the economy and turn it into a credible economic alternative to the president?
I think they certainly can. Whether they will is a bigger issue for them. I mean, there's no question there's serious disenchantment about the president's stewardship of the economy. His numbers on the economy are consistently much lower than they are on his personal ratings in other areas, like national security. So it's ripe for them to create some kind of alternative narrative on the economy, but there doesn't appear to be any indication that they've learned any lessons about their own failures in the past, and they seem to be doubling down on the worst elements of the Republican agenda that most people dislike. Supply-side tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulatory agenda, a very extreme kind of limited government libertarian view. I mean, this is not what the American public wants at a time of great economic insecurity. They're not going to be interested in a party that wants to gut Social Security and Medicare, doesn't really care about unemployment benefits, a host of things that people rely on to try and get their lives in order and to move ahead. So they can take advantage of this. But all indications, given the policy platforms of the candidates in the primaries, are that they haven't figured out a way to craft an economic agenda and narrative that will appeal beyond the Tea Party conservative base.
You've also got an economy, albeit slow, but it is improving over the last several months, and jobs, obviously, the job number has consistently gone down over the last few months. That makes this a tougher hill for the Republicans to climb as well, I would think. Yeah,
I mean, that's those numbers, obviously, a fair amount of that can change over the course of the year. I mean, sure. Who knows if there's some meltdown in Europe, variety of other things that could go wrong. But I've been surprised, and probably you have and your listeners as well, at how quickly Governor Romney's negatives have gone up over the issue of private equity and his time at Bain and other things. So the one thing they were banking on, should they go forward with Romney, was his experience in business, which is now potentially a greater liability given the issues of economic fairness that the president and progressives and the occupations are raising. Those things have changed the dynamic a little bit in interesting ways.
We're speaking with John Halpin, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress and co-director and creator of its Progressive Studies program. John, how can the Republican nominee appeal beyond the party's older, more conservative, white evangelical base?
I mean, this is a long-term challenge for the Republican Party. They really haven't. I doubt they're going to do anything significant in this cycle to change some of these things. They won't. They won't change their position or moderate at all on issues of immigration. They continue to push a lot of social culture war issues. They could certainly gain some momentum from those things, but in the long term, that's not the direction of the country. It's not where most people will be. Their nominees don't represent a sort of change, in the landscape of the country. They continue to sort of play into an old tradition, sort of restoration of an older, almost like mid-century vision of America, and that's not that appealing to people outside of their base. And so I think that they're going to have some real troubles. I mean, they may try and do it through some other candidates, maybe try and recruit some diverse candidates, but there's no indication that they're really taking any serious steps to come up with a platform or outreach mechanism to appeal beyond that base. I think what they're banking on is maximizing that base and having the turnout differential be greater, in their favor.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Democratic apathy, the combination of Democratic apathy and Republican energy, make the electorate much more conservative leaning than its underlying demographics would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the fear for the president and his team. And, if you just comparing 2008 to 2010, there's all sorts of issues that come into play there. But the electorates were markedly different. I mean, the 2010 electorate was much older, more conservative, white, evangelical. The independents who showed up were more Republican-leaning, and the Democrats got clobbered. So, I think the apathy issue, the energy on the other side will matter. The issues shaping the earlier parts in the year was, is Obama going to be able to motivate his progressive base? He's clearly taken on, the ideas and even the rhetoric of his progressive base on economic fairness issues. I think he's picked some fights there. He's going against the other side. I think his base is going to be motivated much more than they anticipated. And then conversely, there doesn't appear to be all that much excitement for the leading presidential candidates on the Republican side. Now that will change, but obviously, I mean, the the taste of potential victory will get them motivated again. But there various constituencies in the Republican coalition have problems with the two primary candidates they're considering now, Gingrich and Romney, so that could contribute to some decline in energy there.
The Tea Party. Has the Tea Party run its course as an electoral influence?
It is amazing how quickly the perceived influence of them has gone down. I mean, it almost seems that their biggest influence is on the policy agenda of the Republican Party, which is disastrous for them in many ways because people disagree with it. I would never say it's run its course as an electoral influence. I think they're going to figure out a way to continue to push their candidates, and it's unclear how much direct influence it'll have. I mean, I think most people are fairly aligned. You won't be able to discern the influence of the Tea Party within the Republican coalition because they're all sort of on the same page for the most part. But their numbers have really declined. The American public does not like a lot of what the Tea Party's been pushing. So it's probably made establishment Republicans, pretty nervous about its influence, but they've already opened that box, and the Tea Party, runs the Republican Party, even if it doesn't control all the levers. Its agenda, its hostile, anti-government stance, this whole idea of the producers and the takers and all of their extreme culture war language. It defines the modern Republican Party in many ways, and so it will have influence even if it doesn't always have electoral influence.
I am amazed at the way that the Tea Party head keeps rearing itself. I mean, I'm shocked by it because when you look at the overall percentage of Republicans and what percentage are Tea Partiers per se, that's a really small number.
It is. I mean, the brand has gotten tarnished because it doesn't help when you have the O'Donnells and others of the that some of the people they put forth hastily to represent the Tea Party. The Bachmans and others. I mean, some of the local leaders. I mean, people are a little nervous. They may have some, beliefs in limited government, but some of the positions of their leaders have been so extreme that people don't want to have much to do with it. That said, I think because the Tea Party was really just a rebranding of conservative republicanism to begin with, that element's still going to be there whether they call themselves Tea Party or not.
Sure. Before we let you go, do you think the Occupy Wall Street movement helps or hurts the president's chances?
Oh, I think absolutely it's helped him in terms of shifting the public debate towards issues of economic fairness, equity in the tax system, corporate control of politics. We'll see what happens. My guess is the occupations they're not all that pleased with elements of the Democratic Party and the president overall, but I think given their focus on what's wrong with the American economy and being able to tap into that, it certainly helps shift the debate in an important direction. I don't think, in terms of electoral, like on the ground mobilizing, I don't think that's not really the issue with the occupations. But I think in terms of challenging the dominant laissez-faire, we've got to focus on limited government, deregulatory policy. The Occupy Wall Street movement has certainly helped in that direction to help make a sort of moral and political case about the corruption of the system and the need to restore the middle class and opportunities for the working poor and those who, aren't in the 1% of the country.
Okay. John Halpin, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress and co-director and creator of its Progressive Studies program. Also co-author of a paper that came out last fall, The Path to 270, Demographics versus Economics in the 2012 presidential election. John, thank you so much for your time. As always, we look forward to speaking to you again here on americasdemocrats.org.
I appreciate it. Anytime.
All right. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks Wisconsin recall election with John Nichols, a correspondent for The Nation, and with the National Journal's Major Garrett.
We're coming to you live from our nation's capital, Move. In studio with us, White House correspondent and congressional correspondent for the National Journal, Major Garrett. Major, good to have you here.
Always great to be with you.
Less a week from yesterday, less than a week away, finally we come to a head in Wisconsin with the recall election for Governor Scott Recall, Democrat Tom Barrett trying to take over and knock Scott Walker out. And we are joined on the ground in Madison, Wisconsin, by the Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine, our good friend John Nichols. Hey, John, good morning.
Hey, Bill. What's a political reporter as smart as Major Garrett doing sitting in Washington when you got the political fight of the century playing out in Madison, Wisconsin?
Well, watch out. He may be heading your way. So, John, I just want you to know, you have a double duty today, a real challenge, because look, you've got me, and you know where I stand on this recall. I'm a go Tom Barrett, and then you've got Major Garrett, who just wants to know what the hell, a good reporter, his interest
what's
is
happening on the ground.
What's happening on the ground. So what can you tell us both, first of all, on what's happening as you see it out there?
Well, right, we're lucky because we have a confluence of events that ought to make you feel good and ought to inform Major.
All right.
First off, the race has been a total roller coaster, and the best way to understand it is, and both you and Major being so engaged in politics for so long, we'll get this one. The Wisconsin fight had the nomination of Scott Walker's challenger on May 8th. The election is on June 5th. That means a 1-month period passes.
Yep.
Now, by comparison, in presidential politics, you usually know who the nominees of the major parties will be in March or April.
True.
And so you have a 7-month period there. So imagine collapsing a presidential race down so that every day is the equivalent of a week. And every week is the equivalent of a month and a half. That's sort of what you've seen in Wisconsin, where you've got, in such a fast pace, people live and die based on a poll number. They rise and fall. The money being spent on a daily basis is so astronomical that I think it's hard for people to imagine. Scott Walker, I calculated this last night, in the current fundraising cycle, Scott Walker has been raising money at a rate of $7,000 an hour. He just turned in a $5 million fundraising report for the last month, and then he updated it with an additional $800,000 just from the last couple days.
Yeah, but John,
putting his total more than $30 million, right?
More than $30 million, right?
And according to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, 57% of it, and this was maybe not reflecting of these most recent allocations, came from out of state.
Yeah, in fact, in the most recent, it's over 70% from out of state. And that's not even the beginning of it, because when you calculate out, it looks to be in the range of another 12 to 15 million just on air and in direct mail coming from allied groups. So Scott Walker's at about $45 million worth of advertising in his favor or against his opponent. Now, by comparison, so Tom Barrett, in the current cycle, he raised about $3 million. And that means that, for comparison's sake, for what it's worth, Walker's at, roughly, 12-to-1 ratio. And then one group, the Republican Governors Association, has spent more money in the last month than Tom Barrett has raised and spent in the whole campaign.
Well, but doesn't that make those supporters of Tom Barrett, and rightfully so, pretty nervous? I mean,
Sure.
that's a huge spending advantage on the part of Scott Walker. And you know as well as I, the Republican Party has decided that this is where they want to take a stand. This is where they want to make a statement right now in June in Wisconsin, because they know that'll have a huge impact on what happens nationwide in November. Makes me kind of nervous, John. Should it?
It should make you nervous, absolutely, because you have to put that money scenario on the line. You've got to see that in order to understand what's playing out here. Against that reality, against that amazing amount of money, so far not a single poll has shown Scott Walker over 50%. There have been polls that have shown him ahead. And in fact, there is a pattern of polling from about a week and a half ago, which, of course, national political players who sort of treat states out in the middle of the country a lot like Africa. We have to learn the names of the capitals, but they are like, oh, it's over. There was a poll a week and a half ago that shows Walker ahead. Now we can turn back to wondering what Mitt Romney said today, right? Because it's so much easier to cover out of Washington. But the reality on the ground is that the pattern of polling in the last few days seems to have been favorable toward Barrett. And there is a reason for that, because as we said with all that money stuff, money does matter. And only in the last week of this whole campaign, only in the last week has Tom Barrett had something akin to competitiveness on TV. Not merely by his own money, but also, frankly, by money coming in from national unions. And so, as Barrett has in the last week delivered a very strong message on Scott Walker's ethics issues, particularly a John Doe criminal probe into the governor's former office, as well as his 2010 campaign, which has already yielded 14 felony indictments, lots of scandal there, although important to point out the governor himself has not yet been implicated. But as this scandal has played out, you have seen movement. Now, closing off the whole scenario here, the question of can Tom Barrett's efforts and the efforts of his supporters to open up a real dialogue about Governor Walker's ethics move enough folks, basically, frankly, get enough Republicans scratching their head, energize enough Democrats that Barrett pulls this thing off. Now, I think that we're in that's the place where the questions are. There's a big poll coming out today, the Marquette University poll. It has skewed a little conservative, but my sense is that we get a lot of instruction from that. There is a huge debate tomorrow, the last debate between the two. And so I think the next, 36 hours, 40 hours, are going to tell us a lot about whether Barrett can close this gap.
Two questions, John. One, when you talk to either Barrett supporters, union supporters, or just rank-and-file Democrats, do they feel this, if surge is too strong a word, correct me, or this sense that maybe there is some momentum developing for Barrett, and do you detect any overconfidence among Republicans? Because I will tell you, in conversations here in Washington, Republicans believe this race is already won. They've already baked into the cake of their own expectations a Walker victory. Narrow, perhaps,
Absolutely.
But a victory nonetheless. And I wonder if in the psychology there, if you could have any sort of assumption on rank-and-file Republicans, well, he's probably got it, I don't need to show up, whereas you could have Democrats saying to themselves, this might be breaking our way and we need to redouble, maybe triple our ground game efforts.
Terrific question. The proviso I will give you is Wisconsin is like nothing you have ever seen. The energy level on both sides is through the roof. People are wildly engaged. When you go, you can literally go to towns of 2,000 people, and the yard signs are in every yard. I did an event out at a bookstore for my book in Spring Green, Wisconsin, a town of a couple thousand. There were 250 people came. So the level of engagement with this thing is so high, Major, that I don't think either side is going to stand down.
Right, so no sleeping at the switch.
No, and I think that, but you're right to ask, your question goes to the heart of the matter. I think the Republicans are highly engaged. They see this as, a sort of a triumphal march and one that redeems a lot of stuff. This governor has not been able to do public appearances in much of Wisconsin because he has been perceived to be so incredibly unpopular. So if he wins this race for the Republicans, it is an incredibly redemptive moment, and they're pushing for that with everything they've got. They've also got very strong conservative talk radio in Madison, to some extent Milwaukee to a large extent, and so they're clearly, they have people talking them up on a daily basis. The big deal is that this sense of some progress, some significant progress, both presence on television as well as some polls that have shown Tom Barrett closing the gap, that has gotten Democrats who are on kind of an emotional roller coaster to sort of buck up and, go for it, so to speak. You know what I mean? Not to be whining about, oh, man, Walker's got all this money. And I have to tell you, we have created a nation of pundits. Everybody's a pundit now. And so you run into 12-year-old kids, and they're sort of, I don't know if Barrett can overcome the independent expenditure advantage there that Walker's got. The super PACs are coming in. And you're like, why aren't you listening to Selena Gomez?
All right. Hey, John, I just wanted to jump in because just before we let you go, I've got to ask you that the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, said Friday, as you know, on C-SPAN, she doesn't see any national impact if Walker were to win and Tom Barrett, I would say, God forbid, were to lose. She sees no national impact if Democrats lose. How was that received among Democrats in Wisconsin?
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I understand, came to Wisconsin yesterday, but I heard no mention of it. The simple reality is she has been seen as someone who is kind of not up to speed and not a particularly useful player. I don't know that it's not my desire to particularly bang on her one way or the other. I think she is totally engaged with the Obama re-election campaign and kind of can't be bothered to pay attention to some of these other races. But it is very fair to say that the Democratic National Committee's role in Wisconsin has been a dysfunctional one, not because they haven't been supported. They actually initially, and at some stages, have brought money in, but their verbiage has been ridiculously off message. Yeah. Whereas the Republican National Committee constantly uses terms like all in, biggest fight of the year.
I know.
And so it is a real challenge there just on language.
I think they've missed the boat. The DNC has missed the boat, and so has President Obama, frankly, I believe, in Wisconsin. I think this is huge importance. John, you got 5 more days, so we're counting on you. I'm counting on you to pull this off.
We're all counting on you, John.
Don't put any pressure on me, brother, but pay attention to it. This has huge national repercussions.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay. Hey, John, great to have you with us as always. John Nichols, the Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine, and Major and I will we'll clean up whatever other issues remain when we come right back.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Tamara Draut, John Halpin, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate.